Good afternoon. معكم حسن أبو عباس المحلل بالأسواق المالية من شركة أوكشير. اليوم صدر خبر قبل شوي، خبر كتير مهم، وهو الفوائد الفيدرال الأمريكية. وإجا هذا الخبر مثل المتوقع، مثل السابق 5.5، فما تغير بالمعدل الفايدة. هذا الخبر كان له تأثير كتير قوي على الأسواق المالية. إجا سلبي للدولار وإيجابي للذهب والمؤشرات. هذا كان انعكاسه. خلينا هلا نحن وياكم نسمع جيروم باويل رئيس الفدرال الامريكي بالبريس كونفرنس اللي عم يعمله.
Are you ready to get creative with your writing? Quillbot Premium offers one shortened mode to make your.
As we look ahead to next year, I want to assure the American people that we're fully committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal. Restoring price stability is essential to achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all. Since early last year, the FOMC has significantly tightened the stance of monetary policy. We've raised our policy interest rate by 5.25 percentage points and have continued to reduce our securities holdings at a brisk pace. Our actions have moved our policy rate well into restrictive territory, meaning that tight policy is putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation, and the full effects of our tightening likely have not yet been felt. Today, we decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings. Given how far we have come, along with the uncertainties and risks that we face, the committee is proceeding carefully. We will make decisions about the extent of any additional policy firming and how long policy will remain restrictive based on the totality of the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. I will have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing economic developments. Recent indicators suggest that growth of economic activity has slowed substantially from the outsized pace seen in the third quarter. Even so, GDP is on track to expand around 2.5% for the year as a whole, bolstered by strong consumer demand as well as improving supply conditions. After picking somewhat over the summer, activity in the housing sector has flattened out and remains well below the levels of a year ago, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. In our summary of economic projections, committee participants revised up their assessments of GDP growth this year, but expect growth to cool, with the median projection falling to 1.4% next year. The labor market remains tight, but supply and demand conditions continue to come into better balance. Over the past 3 months, payroll job gains averaged 204,000 jobs per month, a strong pace that is nevertheless below that seen earlier in the year. The unemployment rate remains low at 3.7%. Strong job creation has been accompanied by an increase in the supply of workers. The labor force participation rate has moved up since last year, particularly for individuals aged 25 to 54 years, and immigration has returned to pre-pandemic levels. Nominal wage growth appears to be easing, and job vacancies have declined. Although the jobs-to-workers gap has narrowed, labor demand still exceeds the supply of available workers. FOMC participants expect the rebalancing in the labor market to continue, easing upward pressures on inflation. The median unemployment rate projection in the SEP rises somewhat from 3.8% at the end of this year to 4.1% at the end of next year. Inflation has eased over the past year, but remains above our longer-run goal of 2%. Based on the Consumer Price Index and other data, we estimate that total PCE prices rose 2.6% over the 12 months ending in November, and that, excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 3.1%. The lower inflation readings over the past several months are welcome, but we will need to see further evidence to build confidence that inflation is moving down sustainably toward our goal. Longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. As is evident from the SEP, we anticipate that the process of getting inflation all the way to 2% will take some time. The median projection in the SEP is 2.8% this year, falls to 2.4% next year, and reaches 2% in 2026. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We're highly attentive to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. As I noted earlier, since early last year, we have raised our policy rate by 5.25 percentage points, and we have decreased our securities holdings by more than $1 trillion. Our restrictive stance of monetary policy is putting downward pressure on economic activity and inflation. The committee decided at today's meeting to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25 to 5.5%, and to continue the process of significantly reducing our securities holdings. While we believe that our policy rate is likely at or near its peak for this tightening cycle, the economy has surprised forecasters in many ways since the pandemic, and ongoing progress toward our 2% inflation objective is not assured. We are prepared to tighten policy further if appropriate. We're committed to achieving a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation sustainably down to 2% over time, and to keeping policy restrictive until we're confident that inflation is on a path to that objective. In our SEP, FOMC participants wrote down their individual assessments of an appropriate path for the federal funds rate based on what each participant judges to be the most likely scenario going forward. While participants do not view it as likely to be appropriate to raise interest rates further, neither do they want to take the possibility off the table. If the economy evolves as projected, the median participant projects that the appropriate level of the federal funds rate will be 4.6% at the end of 2024, 3.6% at the end of 2025, and 2.9% at the end of 2026, still above the median longer-term rate. These projections are not a committee decision or plan. If the economy does not evolve as projected, the path of policy will adjust as appropriate to foster our maximum employment and price stability goals. In light of the uncertainties and risks and how far we have come, the committee is proceeding carefully. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting based on the totality of the incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation, as well as the balance of risks. In determining the extent of any additional policy firming that may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, and economic and financial developments. We remain committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. I wanted to ask, how should we interpret the addition of the word any before additional firming in the statement? I mean, does that mean that you're pretty much done with rate hikes and the committee has shifted away from a tightening bias and toward a more neutral stance? Thank you.
So specifically on any, we do say that in determining the extent of any additional policy firming that may be appropriate, so any additional policy firming, that sentence. So we added the word any as an acknowledgement that we believe that we are likely at or near the peak rate for this cycle. Participants didn't write down additional hikes that we believe are likely, so that's what we wrote down. But participants also didn't want to take the possibility of further hikes off the table. So that's really what we were thinking.
Mr. Chairman, microphone, sorry. Steve Leisman, CNBC. Happy holidays, Mr. Chairman. Fed Governor Chris Waller said that if inflation continues to fall, then the Fed in the next several months could be cutting interest rates. I wonder if you could comment on whether you agree with Fed Governor Waller on that the Fed would become more restrictive if it didn't cut rates if inflation fell. Thank you, sir.
So, of course, I don't comment on any other officials, even those who work at the Fed. But I'll try to answer your question more broadly. So the way we're looking at it is really this. When we started out, right, we said the first question is how fast to move, and we moved very fast. The second question is, really how high to raise the policy rate, and that's really the question that we're still on here. We're very focused on that. As I mentioned, people generally think that we're at or near that, and think it's not likely that we will hike, although they don't take that possibility off the table. So that's when you get to that question, and that's your answer. There's a naturally it begins to be the next question, which is when it will become appropriate to begin dialing back the amount of policy restraint that's in place. So that's really the next question, and that's what people are thinking about and talking about. And I would just say this: we are seeing strong growth that appears to be moderating. We're seeing a labor market that is coming back into balance by so many measures, and we're seeing inflation making real progress. These are the things we've been wanting to see. We can't know. We still have a ways to go. No one is declaring victory. That would be premature, and we can't be guaranteed of this progress. So we're moving carefully in making that assessment of whether we need to do more or not. That's really the question that we're on. But of course, the other question, the question of when will it become appropriate to begin dialing back the amount of policy restraint in place, that begins to come into view and is clearly a topic of discussion out in the world, and also a discussion for us at our meeting today.
Can you give some color as to the nature of that discussion today? Thank you.
Sure. So it comes up in this way today. Everybody wrote down an SEP forecast, so many people mentioned what their rate forecast was, and there was no back and forth, no attempt to sort of reach agreement kind of thing, and preliminary kind of a discussion like that. Not everybody did that, but many people did. And I would say there's a general expectation that this will be a topic for us looking ahead. That's really what happened in today's meeting. I can't do the head count for you in real time, but that's generally what happened today.
Rachel. Hi, Chair Powell. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Thanks for taking our questions. At this point, can you confidently say that the economy has avoided a recession and isn't heading for one now? And if the answer is no, I'm curious about what you'd still be looking for.
I think you can say that there's little basis for thinking that the economy is in a recession now. I would say that. I think there's always a probability that there will be a recession in the next year, and it's a meaningful probability no matter what the economy is doing. So it's always a real possibility. The question is it? So it's a possibility here. I have always felt since the beginning that there was a possibility, because of the unusual situation, that the economy could cool off in a way that enabled inflation to come down without the kind of large job losses that have often been associated with high inflation and tightening cycles. So far, that's what we're seeing. That's what many forecasters on and off the committee are seeing. This result is not guaranteed. It is far too early to declare victory, and there are certainly risks. It's certainly possible that the economy will behave in an unexpected way. It has done that repeatedly through in the post-pandemic period. Nonetheless, where we are is we see the things that I mentioned.
I'm curious if you're looking back on the past year. You talked about navigating by the stars under cloudy skies. Can you talk about some of the ways in which the economy surprised you most this year, where you thought it would behave in one way and had to pivot to respond? Thanks.
So I think forecasters generally, if you go back a year, were very broadly forecasting a recession for this year, for 2023. And not only did that not happen, that includes Fed forecasters and really essentially all forecasters. A very high proportion of forecasters were expecting very weak growth or a recession. Not only did that not happen, we actually had a very strong year. And that was a combination of strong demand, but also real gains on the supply side. So this was the year when labor force participation picked up, where immigration picked up, where the distortions to supply and demand from the pandemic, the shortages and the bottlenecks, really began to unwind. So we had significant supply side gains with strong demand, and we got what looks like a 2.5% plus or a little more than that growth year at a time when potential growth this year might even have been higher than that, just because of the healing on the supply side. So that was a surprise to just about everybody. I think the inflation forecast is roughly what people wrote down a year ago, but in a very different setting. And I would say the labor market, because of the stronger growth, has also been significantly better. If you look back at the SEP from a year ago, there was a significant increase in unemployment. That didn't really happen. We're still at 3.7%. So we've seen strong growth, still a tight labor market, but one that's coming back into balance with support from the supply side, a greater supply of labor. It's that's what we see, and that I think that combination was not anticipated broadly.
Thanks, Howard Schneider with Reuters, and thanks for taking the questions. I wonder if you could give a little more color or detail on what motivates the lower rates next year, whether.
طيب بنكتفي بهالقد من خطاب باويل، وأبرز ما أجا بحكيه إنه سيناريو رفع الفايدة بعده ضمن الخيارات لحد ما يوصل للهدف تاعولن يلي هو 2% من التضخم. المتوقع إنه يخفض الفايدة بين عام 25 و 26 2025. بيرجع بأكد أكثر من مرة على التزامهم ليوصلوا ل 2% من التضخم. الطلب على العمالة بعده عم يتجاوز العروض. السياسات النقدية المتشددة بعدها مستمرة للوصول للهدف 2%. من المتوقع بأنه النفقات الاستهلاك الشخصي الأساسية ترتفع بنسبة 3.1 خلال هيدي السنة، والإفراجات بتبلش من عام 2025. متوقع أنه الفايدة بأواخر 2024 توصل ل 4.6 و 3.6 بعام 2025. والآثار الكاملة للتشدد يلي عم بقوموا فيه هلأ بعدها ما ظهرت 100%، ولكن ارتفاع الأسعار الفايدة بلش يزيد كاهل الاستثمار التجاري، وقبل ما ياخدوا أي قرار بكل اجتماع حيشوفوا ينزلوا للبيانات الموجودة الاقتصادية قبل ما يتاخد أي قرار بخصوص الفايدة. هيدا كل شيء تقريبا اجا بخطاب باويل، فبعده نفس الشيء عم يحكي تقريبا بنفس الأمور اللي كان عم يحكي فيها سابقا. بعده الهدف المنشود هو 2% من التضخم، وحيضلوا مستمرين بالتشدد للوصول لهذا الهدف. شكرا كتير لكم، نلتقى فيكم مرة جديدة بخطاب جديد مع باويل.